Lieutenant Marcus Webb had seen a lot of impossible things since humanity started reaching for the stars, but nothing had prepared him for what he was watching through his rifle scope on the frost-covered ridgeline of Arcturus VII. The question burning in his mind wasn't whether he should intervene. It was already too late for that. A lone figure stood 50 meters from his position, completely unprotected, walking straight toward a pack of Kirathi hunters. The six-legged apex predators that had killed 3 members of his survey team just 2 days ago. Marcus's finger hovered over the trigger, his breath forming small clouds in the thin atmosphere, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched the figure move with an almost supernatural calm through the crystalline snow. The Kirathi pack, 12 full-grown adults and at least 7 cubs, had already spotted the intruder, their obsidian eyes reflecting the pale blue light of the system's twin suns, their muscular bodies tensing for what would surely be a brutal attack. Marcus had orders to maintain stealth, to observe and report, not to engage. But watching someone walk to their death wasn't something he'd signed up for, regulations be damned. He was about to squeeze the trigger for a warning shot when the figure stopped, and he finally got a clear look through his scope. She was humanoid, but definitely not human, at least not entirely. Her ears swept back into elegant points that caught the light like carved crystal, and her skin had a faint luminescent quality that made her seem almost ethereal against the stark white landscape. She wore fitted tactical pants in deep midnight blue and a form-fitting jacket with silver geometric patterns that looked both practical and impossibly stylish. Her long platinum hair cascading down her back in a braid that swayed gently in the Arctic wind. But what struck Marcus most wasn't her appearance, it was the complete absence of fear in her posture. She stood before the Kirathi pack like she was greeting old friends at a cafe, not facing creatures that could tear through combat armor like tissue paper. The alpha male, a massive beast with scars crossing his dark fur, took 3 deliberate steps forward, his 6 legs moving in perfect coordination, his lip curling back to reveal teeth the size of combat knives. Marcus's training screamed at him to take the shot, to save this foolish alien woman who clearly didn't understand the danger she was in. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then she did something that made him freeze. She knelt down in the snow, never breaking eye contact with the alpha, and extended her hand palm down in a gesture that was somehow both submissive and confident. The alpha's growl rumbled across the frozen plain like distant thunder, and Marcus could see every muscle in the creature's body coiled to strike. The rest of the pack had formed a semicircle now, cutting off any escape route, their breath steaming in the cold air, their intelligence obvious in how they coordinated without a sound. This was it, Marcus thought. This was the moment he'd have nightmares about for the rest of his life, watching this beautiful, mysterious woman get torn apart because he hesitated. But the alpha didn't attack. Instead, the massive predator moved closer, lowering its head until its snout was inches from the woman's outstretched hand, and then impossibly it closed the distance. She touched the Kirathi's head with a gentleness that seemed to ripple through the air itself, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately, scratching behind what Marcus supposed were its ears, if the anatomical reports were accurate. The alpha's eyes, which had been hard as volcanic glass moments before, slowly closed. A sound emerged from deep within the creature's chest, not a growl, but something else entirely. Something that Marcus's translator implant struggled to process before settling on the word purr, though that seemed ridiculous for a half-ton apex predator. The woman smiled, and even from 50 meters away, through a rifle scope, Marcus could see the pure joy radiating from her expression. She whispered something in a language his implant couldn't catch, her lips moving with words that seemed to carry meaning beyond their sound. Then came the moment that would change everything. Marcus thought he knew about xenobiology, animal behavior, and maybe the universe itself. One of the cubs, a smaller creature about the size of a full-grown earth panther, broke from the pack and approached the woman. She turned her head slightly, acknowledged the cub with a soft sound, and gave it the same gentle scratch she'd given the alpha, her fingers working through its dense fur with practiced ease. The cub made a chirping sound of pleasure, its multiple legs doing a little dance in the snow that was almost comical. Then another cub approached, and another, and then something happened that made Marcus lower his rifle entirely and just stare in complete disbelief. The entire Kirathi pack, adults and cubs alike, formed a perfect queue, a straight line with precise spacing that would make any drill sergeant weep with pride. each waiting patiently for their turn to receive attention from this strange alien woman who had walked into their territory like she owned it. They weren't fighting for position, weren't jostling or growling at each other, they simply stood in line with military precision, occasionally glancing forward with what Marcus could only describe as anticipation. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered into his CUB, forgetting radio silence entirely. "Command, are you seeing this?" His commanding officer's voice crackled back immediately, tight with confusion. "Webb, please confirm visual. Did those creatures just form a queue?" "Affirmative, sir. Single file line, perfect spacing, zero aggression. The alien female is she's petting them. All of them." There was a long pause on the other end, and Marcus could imagine the chaos erupting in the command center back at base camp. "Maintain position and observe, Webb. Do not, I repeat, do not engage unless the civilian is in immediate danger. We're sending a xenobiologist team to your location. ETA 20 minutes. But Marcus wasn't sure he could look away, even if he wanted to. The woman was working her way down the line now, giving each Kirathi individual attention, scratching different spots as if she knew exactly where each one preferred to be touched. She spoke to each of them, her voice carrying across the snow in melodic tones that his translator couldn't parse, but his heart somehow understood. She was communicating, not with words, but with intention, with emotion, with a connection that transcended language. The Kirathi responded in kind, each one displaying subtle body language that spoke of contentment, trust, and something that looked disturbingly close to affection. When she reached the last CUB in line, a tiny thing that couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, she spent extra time, cradling its head in both hands and pressing her forehead gently against its snout. The CUB's legs gave out entirely, and it collapsed into a happy puddle in the snow, making sounds that Marcus's implant finally translated as joyful vocalization. The woman laughed, a sound so genuinely warm that Marcus found himself smiling despite the absurdity of the situation. That's when she turned and looked directly at his position. Marcus's blood turned to ice. There was no way she could see him. He was in full camouflage, behind cover, with a glare shield on his scope. But her eyes, a striking violet color that seemed to contain entire galaxies, locked onto his location with perfect accuracy. She smiled, not the warm expression she'd given the Kirathi, but something more knowing, more amused. Then she beckoned him forward with a simple gesture. Every instinct Marcus had developed over 8 years of military service told him to stay put, to maintain position, to wait for backup. But something deeper, something that lived in the part of his brain that still remembered what it was like to be a child, meeting a friendly dog for the first time, urged him forward. He made his decision in a heartbeat. "Command, I'm moving in for closer observation," he reported, already standing up. "Webb, negative. Maintain your..." He switched off his CUB. He'd face the consequences later. Right now, he needed to understand what was happening, needed to know who this woman was and how she'd turned the most dangerous predators on the planet into a patient queue of eager puppies. Marcus moved down the ridge slowly, his rifle lowered but ready, his boots crunching in the snow with each step. The Kirathi pack watched his approach with interest, but no aggression, which was somehow more unsettling than if they'd attacked. When he was close enough to speak without shouting, he stopped, suddenly aware of how inadequate his combat armor looked compared to her elegant outfit, how clumsy he felt compared to her graceful confidence. "How?" he asked, the single word encompassing about 1,000 questions. She tilted her head, her pointed ears shifting slightly with the movement, and he noticed small silver rings adorned with tiny bells that chimed softly. "You assume there's a trick," she said, her voice accented with tones he couldn't place, speaking perfect standard through what must be her own translator. "There isn't. I simply asked permission and showed respect." "Asked permission?" "These things killed 3 of my team. They're apex predators. They don't do permission." Her expression shifted to something sadder, more serious. "They killed your team because your team came with fear and weapons, treating them like monsters instead of the intelligent, social beings they are. Fear breeds fear. Violence breeds violence. Surely humans understand this?" Marcus felt a flash of defensiveness rise in his chest, but he forced it down. She was right, after all. The survey team had come in with heavy weapons after the first Kirathi sighting, had treated this planet like hostile territory to be conquered rather than a home to be respected. "Who are you?" he asked instead. My name is Lyria Vel'tharion, Cultural Liaison for the Astral Confederation. And you are? Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Though you're probably wondering how I know that, she smiled at his surprised expression. Your name tag is visible, and I've been monitoring your team's communications for the past week. I came to prevent exactly the kind of incident that would have happened if you'd fired that rifle. You've been watching us? Someone had to. The Astral Confederation has protocols when new species start expanding into already inhabited systems. We observe, we assess, and when necessary, we intervene before irreparable damage is done. She gestured to the Kirathi pack, who had settled into various relaxed positions in the snow, watching the two of them with curious eyes. These beings have families, social structures, culture. The cub you almost designated as hostile yesterday? She was playing, the same as any child plays. The attack on your team was a defensive response to perceived invasion. Context matters. Marcus felt something heavy settle in his stomach. We're the invaders. You're explorers who didn't know better. There's a difference. But now you do know better, which means you have a choice. Lyria stepped closer, and Marcus could see that her eyes weren't just violet, they held flecks of silver that seemed to move like liquid metal. You can continue as you were, treating every new species as either a resource to exploit or a threat to eliminate. Or you can learn what we learned millennia ago, that the universe is better when we approach it with open hands instead of closed fists. One of the cubs, the tiny one from the end of the line, waddled over to Marcus and sat down in front of him expectantly. Marcus stared down at the creature that his training manual had designated as extremely dangerous. Avoid all contact, up close. He could see the intelligence in its eyes, the curiosity. The same kind of innocent hope he'd seen in his nephew's puppy. What do I do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyria moved beside him, close enough that he could smell something like frost and starlight, if such things had a scent. Kneel down. Move slowly. Let her come to you. Marcus did as instructed, lowering himself to one knee, his armor servos, whining softly with the movement. The cub tilted its head, studying him with those obsidian eyes, then carefully approached. Palm down, fingers relaxed, Lyria coached softly. Behind the second set of auditory organs, gentle circular motions, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly despite his combat training, and touched the cub's head. The fur was softer than he expected, dense and warm, with an almost electric quality that tingled against his skin. He found the spot Lyria described and began to scratch gently. The cub's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. It collapsed against his leg, its purring so loud he could feel it vibrating through his armor. Without thinking, Marcus laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and delight that echoed across the frozen plain. She likes you, Lyria said, and when Marcus looked up, he saw her smiling at him with an expression that made his heart do something complicated. What's her name? The question was out before he realized how ridiculous it sounded, but Lyria didn't laugh. The Kirathi don't use names the way we do, but her designation in their social structure roughly translates to seventh star of the winter constellation. That's beautiful. Most things are. When you take the time to understand them rather than fear them. She knelt beside him, and together they sat in the snow, with the Kirathi cub between them, the rest of the pack lounging around them in a protective circle. The Astral Confederation has been watching humanity for some time, Lieutenant Webb. You're at a critical juncture in your development as a spacefaring species. This moment, right here, is a test you didn't know you were taking. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the ethereal alien beauty, but the weight of purpose in her eyes. The genuine hope mixed with sadness, as if she'd seen this test taken and failed before. What happens if we fail? Then humanity remains quarantined to your current space, designated as not ready for contact with the greater galactic community. You'll develop alone, possibly for centuries, possibly forever. You'll miss out on the exchange of ideas, culture, technology, and friendship that comes from being part of something larger than yourselves. She reached out and gently stroked the cub's head, her fingers brushing against Marcus's hand in the process, sending a spark of warmth through him that had nothing to do with static electricity. But if you pass, if your species can learn to approach the universe with wonder instead of fear, with respect instead of dominance, then 1,000 worlds open up to you, including mine. There was something in the way she said that last part, a subtle shift in tone that made Marcus's breath catch. And what's your world like? Beautiful and terrifying, peaceful and chaotic, ancient and ever-changing. Not so different from Earth, really. We have oceans that sing, forests that dream, cities built from living crystal that grow according to the needs of their inhabitants. We have art and music and poetry that would make your soul ache with recognition, because beauty is a universal language. Her eyes held his, and Marcus felt like he was falling into those violet depths, seeing hints of all the wonders she described. We also have loneliness, just like you. The loneliness that comes from being the first of our people to make contact with each new species. Never quite sure if this will be the one that understands, that chooses connection over conquest. That sounds incredibly lonely, Marcus said softly. It is, but moments like this make it worthwhile. Seeing someone truly see another being for the first time, watching fear transform into wonder that never gets old. She stood gracefully, brushing snow from her tactical pants. Your backup team will be here in approximately 3 minutes. You have a decision to make, Lieutenant. What will you tell them about what happened here? Marcus looked down at the cub, still leaning against his leg in perfect contentment, then at the pack of deadly predators lounging peacefully around them, then back up at Lyria. The truth, that we've been approaching this all wrong. That there's someone here who can teach us how to do better. Lyria's smile could have powered a sun. Then perhaps humanity isn't as lost as the Confederation feared. I'll be in touch, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Something tells me you and I have much more to discuss about the future of human-alien relations. She turned to leave, and panic flared in Marcus's chest at the thought of her disappearing. Wait, how will I find you? How do I see you again? She looked back over her shoulder, her platinum braids swinging, those pointed ears catching the light, her expression playful and promise-filled all at once. The universe has a way of bringing together those who are meant to meet. But if you're impatient, there's a cafe in the Human Settlements Commercial District. The one with the blue door. I happen to enjoy your species coffee. Tomorrow, perhaps. 1400 hours. Then she simply walked away, and the Kirathi pack stood as one, following her in perfect formation like an honor guard. The cubs bouncing playfully around her feet as she disappeared over the ridge, leaving Marcus kneeling in the snow, with his mind reeling and his heart pounding. When his backup team arrived 4 minutes later, led by Dr. Sarah Chen, the xenobiologist whose eyes went wide at his report, Marcus told them everything exactly as it happened. He showed them the footage from his helmet cam, watched as they rewound and replayed the moment of the queue forming over and over, their scientific minds struggling to process what their eyes clearly showed. This changes everything, Doctor, Chen whispered, her voice filled with awe. Everything we thought we knew about Kirathi behavior, about predator psychology, about my God, Marcus, do you understand what you witnessed? This is first contact. Real first contact, not with the creatures, but with a species that's so far ahead of us in understanding xenobiology that they make us look like children. Marcus thought about Lyria's smile, about the loneliness in her eyes, about the promise of coffee tomorrow at 1400 hours. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm beginning to understand exactly that. That night, as Marcus lay in his bunk at base camp, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment when Lyria had looked directly at him through his camouflage, had seen him, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, something that transcended mere physical sight. He thought about the Kirathi Q, that impossible display of patience and order, and realized it wasn't about the scratches or the affection, it was about being seen. Being acknowledged as individuals rather than threats. It was about respect given and received. The next day, at exactly 1400 hours, Marcus stood outside a cafe with a blue door in the commercial district, his heart hammering harder than it had facing any combat situation. He was in civilian clothes, feeling oddly vulnerable without his armor, carrying nothing but his curiosity and a hope he barely dared to acknowledge. Lyria was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of steaming coffee in front of her, looking impossibly beautiful in a simple outfit that managed to be both alien and familiar, a flowing top in deep emerald that brought out the silver flecks in her eyes, her platinum hair loose around her shoulders, those pointed ears adorned with different bells that chimed softly when she turned her head to smile at him. You came, she said, and he heard genuine pleasure in her voice. I was 93% certain you would. But the 7% of doubt was surprisingly anxiety-inducing. Marcus slid into the seat across from her, accepting the coffee she pushed toward him. Only 93%? What made you doubt? The weight of your world's expectations, the fear of stepping into the unknown, the very human tendency to retreat into what's familiar rather than embrace what's possible. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving his. I'm very glad you proved my 7% wrong, for the record, Marcus said, wrapping his hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat seep into his palms. I was 100% certain I'd be here. From the moment you mentioned it, there was no doubt in my mind. Why? The question was simple, but her expression was complex, hopeful and vulnerable in a way that made her seem less like an advanced alien emissary and more like a woman hoping for a specific answer. Marcus thought about his response carefully, knowing that this moment mattered, that what he said next would set the tone for whatever this was becoming between them. Because yesterday, kneeling in the snow with that cub, with you beside me, teaching me to see instead of fear, I felt more awake than I've felt in years. Because the universe suddenly got a lot bigger and more wonderful. And you're the one who showed me that. Because he met her eyes, those impossible violet galaxies that seemed to see straight into his soul. Because the loneliness you described, I understand it. I've felt it my whole life without knowing what I was lonely for. And when you smiled at me yesterday, for just a moment, that loneliness disappeared. Lyria's expression transformed. A cascade of emotions crossing her features too quickly to name. Settling finally on something radiant and tender. In my culture, she said softly, we have a saying, the universe whispers in patterns, and the wise learn to listen. I've been listening for a very long time. Marcus Webb, waiting for a pattern that felt like possibility instead of duty. I think perhaps I've found it. She reached across the table, her hand palm up in an invitation rather than a command, and Marcus didn't hesitate. He placed his hand in hers, feeling that same electric warmth from before, but stronger now, more intentional. Her fingers interlaced with his, and he noticed that her skin wasn't just luminescent, it actually responded to touch. Subtle patterns of light blooming where they made contact, like bioluminescent waves on a midnight ocean. Is that normal? He asked, fascinated by the display. It's a physiological response to emotional resonance. Our bodies literally light up when we feel a genuine connection with someone. It's rather inconvenient when trying to maintain diplomatic neutrality, but quite useful for eliminating ambiguity in relationships. She smiled, and he could see a faint glow beginning along her cheekbones, following the graceful lines of her face. Right now, I'm afraid I'm being very, very unambiguous. Marcus felt his own face heating, but for entirely human reasons. Good, because I'm not sure I could handle ambiguous. I'm just a soldier who's good at following orders and bad at reading between the lines. Then let me be clear, I would very much like to spend more time with you, teaching you about the universe and learning about the parts of humanity that don't make it into our observation reports. I'd like to introduce you to concepts and cultures that will challenge everything you think you know. And I'd like to do all of that while holding your hand and watching your face light up with wonder. Because apparently I find that extremely appealing. Her directness was disarming and refreshing. And Marcus laughed, squeezing her hand gently. I would like all of that too. Though fair warning, if we're being clear, I'm also finding everything about you extremely appealing. From your impossible eyes to your pointed ears, to the way you made a pack of apex predators queue up like school children. You're the most amazing person I've ever met. Alien or otherwise, they sat there in the caf with the blue door. Two beings from different worlds holding hands across a table. Their fingers intertwined like the beginning of a pattern. The universe had been whispering for longer than either of them knew. While around them, the commercial district bustled with humans who had no idea that the future of their species' place in the galactic community was being decided over coffee and confessions. Tell me about the singing oceans, Marcus said, settling back in his chair, but not letting go of her hand. Tell me about your world, about the Confederation, about everything. Lyria smiled, that radiant expression that seemed to carry its own gravity, pulling him into an orbit he had no desire to escape. That could take a while, possibly years, possibly a lifetime. I've got time, Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. And so she began to talk, painting pictures with her words of worlds beyond imagining, while the twin suns of Arcturus VII slowly set beyond the caf windows. And somewhere out on the frozen plains, a pack of Kirathi settled down for the night in perfect formation. The pattern of the universe, shifting subtly to accommodate two lonely souls who had found each other across the vast distances between the stars. All because one alien girl had the compassion to scratch a cub behind its ears and the wisdom to show a soldier that the universe was full of wonders, waiting for those brave enough to reach out with open hands instead of closed fists.